Well, great. Thank you all for coming out. It's a cool day. I hope nobody gets frostbite. We're in trouble if somebody gets frostbite. But thank you all for coming out. What an appropriate place to tell a story here on Willie Vroom's bench at Windy Cabin. And nobody more appropriate to have as my guest for this first chat of the new season than Don Mickle. Welcome, Don.
Thank you.
No, Don, a lot of you know Don, and of course by the end of this chat you're going to know a lot more about him. But Don comes from an old pioneering family, goes back half a dozen generations, grew up in Millerville, loved horses, spent his whole life with horses as a guide and outfitter and as a warden. And he's going to tell us about that adventurous life today. So tell us a little bit, Don, about your background, your grandparents, and where the Mickle family came from.
Well, they were both my mother and father were in southern Alberta and rural Alberta, and they had a long history of generations previously. And my great-grandfather, Wheeler Mickle, actually was on the Overlander trips in 1862 to the Caribou gold fields. Then he drove stagecoach on the Caribou Trail. It was, I don't think he made any money in the gold mining part of it, but then they had a horse ranch down by Merritt, and where the Douglas Lake Ranch is now. Then he ended up moving to around the Cochrane area, and he had a homestead there. It's called Mission Valley Ranch. It was where the first mission in Alberta was there, actually, in 1873. He had the ranch there a few years later. He drove freight to Fort Benton on that era, and he also drove freight for the Northwest Mounted Police during the Riel Rebellion, which is quite a. He had sent a letter to his wife in the Riel Rebellion that if the boys were good, he'd bring them a new horse.
Yeah. Can you hear Don okay at the back? I think we'll have to speak up a little. No, not the microphone. That microphone is not broadcasting, it's recording.
Okay. Oh, sorry.
No, we're going to have to project our voices.
Okay.
Okay. Pretend you're in a bar room down there in High River or something like that.
And same with my mother's family, actually. They were the Hamiltons, and they'd went into the gold rush as well, and they'd went all the way around. They were from New Brunswick, and they went all the way around South America. Some of them stopped at California to the gold rush, and then her grandfather and great-grandfather and great-uncle went to the Caribou Trail, and they had a ranch there, and then they moved to southern Alberta. So there's a long, rich history of pioneers there. My mom and dad met in 1941, actually. They were, my mother lived out in a ranch west of Turner Valley, and she was riding to a stampede, probably in the dog pound or somewhere like that, and with some friends, and they stopped at the Mickle Ranch. My step-grandfather and my grandfather, Charlie Mickle, were buddies, so they stopped there, and Mom and Dad met, and there was a 40-mile courting time between ranches on horses. So I guess it worked, because they got together and got married the next year.
Yeah. So this is the Mickle Ranch that was near Millerville?
No, this is actually by Cochrane, or south of Cochrane, right where the Elbow River, where Highway 8 and Elbow River kind of in there. Okay. You still see a cairn there about the mission there. Okay.
But you grew up near Millerville.
Yeah, we moved from there to Millerville, ranched and farmed at Millerville, and then we went west of Millerville, and Dad had a trap line there, and we built a log cabin on that. And we used to take our summer holidays, take horses up to the cabin and ride out west there, take pack trips and ride away out to probably know some of the area, Mount Rose and Forget-Me-Not Mountain, that area.
Yeah. And, so you grew up on horses?
Yeah, we had, we always had too many horses. Dad had.
Or if you're
some
a
of his-
cowboy, you can't have too many horses.
I guess not. Yeah.
No, no.
His neighbor said, "Why don't you get rid of some of them horses, Bert, and get some cattle?" Never did.
No, no. And then, so that was the cowboy period out in the foothills. And then you came to Lake Louise in 1962.
Yes, Dad and Ray Legase were friends, and Ray Legase used to run Skokie, and his wife Alpha ran Temple and Skokie, and Ray used to bring some of his horses down at the Mickle homestead there, and they would Dad and his brother would break some of his horses through the winters, and they got to be friends. And we were actually, I think it was 1961, we were going to Golden, or out of Golden. Dad's brother was there, and stopped to see Ray because he'd been sick. So Ray started talking to us and said, he had a lisp, Ray. I don't know whether you ever knew of him, but he was quite a character. And he said, "Yes, Bert, you and your family should take over this outfit. I think you'd do a really good job of it."
Yeah.
He said, I'll help you. I'll stay with you and go on some trips with us. And he was as good as his word. He went on several trips, pack trips with us. And yeah, it was a good start.
Now, the company that you took over, Ray's company, it was already called Timberline Tours, was it?
Yes, Timberline Tours.
Yeah. And then your
Ray.
family ran it for about a dozen years?
12 years, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was a busy time. We had Skokie and Temple and pack trips, horse trips, and then we had hunting trips in the fall. And we had it for skiing. It was just open for March and April then for skiing. We operated that, and also the old Temple Lodge for skiing. So it was quite a busy time.
And what were the jobs? Who did what? What did your mom and your sister Faye?
My sister Faye, yeah. Well, in the summer, my sister Faye ran the horse stables up at the Lake Louise, and Mom was busy with everybody, guiding and cooking and cleaning and making stuff like this. Painting. She was quite an artist. And, Dad was doing pack trips, and we always rounding up horses and shoeing horses, and then taking trips out, of course, and then in the fall hunting we did that.
I remember I was at Lake Louise about the same time working as a driver for a Brewster, and I used to see your dad occasionally. Who here ever met or saw Bert Mickle with his big mustache and his black hat and his black shirt? He looked like something right out of a Hollywood Western.
Yeah, he was pretty Western.
He was pretty Western. He was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lloyd would have remembered him.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyways, and so that's what the business did. You wintered your horses at the Yahatinda.
Yeah, actually,
What's that?
Yahatinda was a huge ranch. It's about 10,000 acres or 7 hectares, and it's government ranch. It's still a government ranch where they keep the horses.
Maybe
At that
speak
time,
up as loud as you can.
Oh, sure.
We'll have to yell a little bit.
Oh,
so
sorry. At that time, we wintered our horses just south of there, between the Red Deer River and the Panther River. There's actually over about 150 head of horses wintered out there. And of course, the government ranch had their own huge herd then too. But we wintered them with Irving Strom had his horses there, and Bill Martin, who used to have Warner Stables, one of them. They wintered their horses there, and so we all turned them out there in the fall, and then had a huge roundup in the spring, which was always pretty exciting.
Yeah, I'll bet it was. And what happened to the horses over the winter?
We'd pull the shoes in the fall and then just turn them loose and check them once in a while in the winter. Take salt out to them, and the odd one wouldn't make it through the winter, and the odd one got shot by hunters. And there's some of them, but most of them made it through fine. There's lots of grass out there.
Yeah, but they were pretty wild when spring came.
Yeah, they were. It was like running wild horses again.
Yeah. So you guys would go and round them all up.
Yeah, we had. It was quite an exciting time. There's probably 5 or 6 of us, including my sister and my father and a few other friends. Bob Haney was one, and Dave Wildman, Keith Foster, a bunch of that ended up being wardens later. Yeah, it was quite exciting. Paul Pito used to come with us.
Yeah,
and
you had some pretty exciting moments. Maybe you could tell us about the night of the big rain when the river was in flood.
Yeah, there was one time there it rained for about 2 days straight, and of course the rivers are high that time of the year anyway. It was in June when we rounded up. And this one night we had our huge corral kind of in an island in the Red Deer River. And Dad woke us up in the middle of the night. It had been raining for 2 days and said, we got to get those horses out of there, because we would put them in the corral at night and then graze them through the day. Took turns grazing while the rest of us rounded up the other horses. And this one night, it was just really raining, and we went out, and Dave Wildman and I had Ben, my old saddle horse Ben, and we went away upriver, and we tried to cross the river, and it was the eeriest feeling. You're like in, the water was flooding so much, it'd wash over your saddle on the uphill side, but you had kind of a fulcrum or a vacuum on the downhill side. It was almost eerie. You can't steer your horse in that kind of, you just want to kind of guide them, because if you try to pull them, they could roll over. And we had good swimming horses, and we were going across, and you can just imagine it was black and raining. And I remember once seeing this little branch floating down, and then it turned over, it was a huge tree. It just missed us. But we got in, we opened the corral, and we chased them across. We were worried there was one colt we thought might not make it, but I think the colt got into that vacuum of the mare, and they all made it across. We could hear the other riders on the other side chasing them, and we somehow made it across.
And who was Ben? Who was your horse, Ben?
Ben was my step-grandfather had passed away, and my grandmother told me to take a pick of it. He had raised quarter horses, and this little 3-year-old with a shaggy mane, I kind of fell in love with him, and I had him for over 30 years after that.
Yeah, Ben was your best friend.
Yeah, he was my friend.
Yeah,
he was a great horse chasing horse.
Yeah, yeah.
Trouble is, he had no brakes. You could get him going, but you couldn't stop him.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, good, good. So you rounded up the horses. Did you shoe them right there?
We shot some of them, and then we'd trail them all the way up to Red Deer Lake, Red Deer River. And the first night wasn't bad. They were really going fast, but we'd go to Scotch camp the first day, and the wardens let us stay in the cabin and stay in the big pasture there with our horses. We had about 80 horses, and the first night was there. I can remember the first time I was there, we still had the old phones like it's in here, and we got in the cabin and the phone was ringing, and I thought, oh, I better check that. And they had a code, 2 longs and a short or whatever, and I picked up the phone. It was for Scotch camp, and it was the ranch boss at Yahatinda, and he says, you guys get back here and get that so-and-so horse you left here. And I thought, well, we had all our horses. And then I remembered Ray had sold one horse called Johnny Jump Up, a big goofy horse, to Erwin Strome the year before. And I said, oh, Bill, that's not our horse. He said, well, it's got a half diamond NU. That was Ray's brand. So, well, check the other side. There should be a broken ski pole. Sure enough, it was. Erwin Strome brand was a broken ski pole. He said, oh, I'm going to have to give Al Johnson shit instead of you then.
So from Yahatinda, which maybe you can describe just about where it is, how you're getting over to Lake Louise.
It's on the Red Deer River, right on the east slope of Banff Park. At one time it was in Banff Park. And in fact, the Brewsters used to lease it at one point. They had their ranch, there still are old bits of their buildings there. Then in 1917, the Parks took it over, and it's been a horse ranch ever since for the Parks. It's right on the east slopes of the Rockies. It's huge montane grasslands. Yahatinda means mountain prairie in Nakota. I asked a Stony one day which was mountain and which was prairie, and he said, Yaha Mountain, Tinda Flat.
And so once you rounded up your horses, then you took them to Lake Louise for the summer operation.
Yeah, we trailed them up the Red Deer to Point Camp on the Pipestone. The next day from Scotch Camp was about a 40-mile ride through there, but the horses trotted and galloped all the way, so it didn't take long. And we left some of them in the Pipestone. We were able to graze everywhere in the park then. And sorry, Gord, I can't talk any louder. I'll try. And we trailed some of them through to Lake Louise. We usually put about 30 horses through to Lake Louise. My sister ran the horse stables up above there. And of course, we'd run them right through town. We kind of showed off a little going through. At that time, there was
Lake Louise.
Yeah, there was a post hotel and there was a service station, and then you cross the river and up to the lake. So we had about 30 horses running through the gas pumps and people scattering.
Yeah.
You probably remember Beef Woodworth. He was the head warden there, and this one time we ran our horses. A couple of them ran through his yard, and Keith Foster and I chased them back out, and we left big skid marks all over his grass. And so he sent word up that we were never to trail another horse through there. We had to halter them from then on, but he left soon after that, so it was all forgotten.
So it was all forgotten. Yeah, yeah. And what was Lake Louise like in those days? What was it, the town?
The village was really small, as you remember, Chic, and there was a post hotel, of course, and then across was a Boyle store and service station. And there was a little duplex that Ray Legace had his store in, and the other side was a post office, and that was about it. There was a school down below and the warden station where the Lake Louise Inn is now. The road used to come in that way.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was pretty quiet. In the winters, it was really quiet. Everybody knew each other. It was all Hillary and Jack McDowell were in charge of the lists and the post hotel and temple, and then Alpha worked for them. And
yeah, Alpha ran the post hotel.
Yeah, and temple.
And temple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she was great. She was a hard worker, just always helping everybody. And Ray was sort of relaxed and sort of. There was this one story when they're not too long after their first marriage, Alpha was cleaning out some dresser drawers, and Ray only had one eye. He had all these glass eyes rolling around in this. And she said, Ray, what do you want to do with these? He said, oh, I don't know, Alfie. Some of them are cracked and some of them are broken, and I can't see out of any of them, so just do whatever you want with them.
Oh, gee. Yeah. And then you went up to the lake, and your mom was sort of the heart. She was sort of the brain, the nerve center of the operation.
Yeah, she was sort of the organizer of us all, trying to keep us out of trouble. And
yeah.
That didn't work too well sometimes. But
No, I bet. But she had a soft spot for you wild cowboys?
Oh, yeah. And she was always taking other people in. And first time I met Lloyd, actually, he hiked into Skokie with us over the snow drifts and was cutting wood there. Yeah. In between jobs.
And your mom was quite an artist too.
Yeah, she did a lot of paintings and made leather stuff. That's why I wore this little.
He says it shrunk.
Shrunk in the closet. Yeah.
It shrunk in the closet. Yeah.
And she actually, I don't know whether any of you have been to Black Diamond, but there's a hotel there, and she still has some of her murals there. But you have to look up in the ceiling. They're all in the ceiling. Oh. She did those in the 50s.
Just like, who was that guy over in Italy painted stuff on the ceiling?
Yeah.
That Italian guy.
Yeah. They're actually on the wall, but I don't.
Yeah. And Kathy Calvert has just written a book.
Yes, she has. She's written a book about Mom. She'd been working on it for about 5 years. She interviewed my mom, just passed away in 2010. And she had all her diaries. Mom kept diaries from 1937, but most of them were very busy today. Didn't have a lot of personal stuff in them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she sent it to the publisher, so it should be out sometime, I don't know, sometime soon. I don't know what she's gonna call it yet. Yeah. Right now it's just June.
Just June, yeah.
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 So,
and you also your family ran Skokie.
Yeah, and the first time we went into Skokie I went in 1962 with just to kind of learn the ropes. And the first trip, Alpha had a big stove she wanted to send in. So Charlie Rainier was an old cowboy, and Keith Foster, who ended up being a park warden, he was from Millerville too. And we packed the stove in, and we tandem packed it. And we put it in between two horses on two rails, and this was my first trip, mind you. It was my first packing lesson, really. Well, we used to pack up in the mountains there, but that kind of packing. So we had old Tangle, the back horse, was looking in the oven, and we we got about 3 or 4 miles up the Ptarmigan Valley, and the whole thing tipped over and almost broke her neck, but the pole broke. So we put it underneath after that, and so we finally got it in there. We got over Boulder okay, but Ptarmigan Lake we had to go straight up through the rocks because it's so windy, and cross Deception Pass, and we got it still in there actually. Leo and Kathy have it in behind the lodge by the woodshed, sitting there as kind of an artifact with flowers on it, I think. But yeah.
Yeah.
So that was my first trip, and then we spent quite a bit of time chopping wood there. This one time Ray came in there with some guests, and Bobby Barker, who also turned out to be a warden, he's in Jasper he just retired a few years ago from Jasper, but he was a young guide then, and Ray come in with the guests, and the next morning we were sitting out at the back of the woodshed having coffee or had breakfast, and he says, "Bobby, run down and get the horses. We're going to go for a ride." So Bob grabs his bridle and heads down. We used to run our horses in Merlin Meadows, which is just below Skokie, and we had a drift fence across there. So about an hour later, Bob comes stomping back up, and he didn't have any horses. And Ray's sitting at the back. I was there with him with the guests, and Ray said, "Bobby, where are the horses?" He said, "I don't know, Ray, they must have went down to the pipestone." He said, "Bobby, come here for a minute." He takes a stick and he draws a little horseshoe in the dirt. He says, "What's that, Bobby?" "I don't know, Ray." He said, "That's your trouble, Bobby. That is exactly what a horse's footprint looks like." "Now you run back down there and you find one of those and you follow it. And when you keep following it, and sometime when you look up, there should be a horse standing there." "Now you run down and get the horses, Bobby."
Oh.
So I went with him. Sure enough, we come back with the horses that day.
Ah, fabulous. Yeah, yeah. Oh, good, good. And then in the autumn, you and your dad and some of your pals, you'd go hunting.
Yeah, we always had hunting trips in the fall.
Not in the park.
Not in the park.
No, outside the park.
We left from the park though, and went over the Safleur a lot of times, and trailed our horses out through the Safleur River, North Saskatchewan River, and up White Rabbit, Ram River. Then the late fall, we would take them back to west of Millerville sometimes. We went up north out of not too far from Nordegg, up the Blackstone, Grave Creek, that area. Yeah, and fall hunting was different, It was good. We had some good people and some people that weren't as much good.
Yeah, there was Arkansas George, was it?
Arkansas George, yeah, he was a good guy.
He was a good guy.
He was a young farmer from Arkansas, and he'd been training, and him and I went backpacking up looking for sheep, actually. We spent about 2 weeks up in Thompson Creek up from the North Saskatchewan River, and just rained and poured and snowed, and we couldn't find anything. Dad had a camp out at 2 O'Clock Creek. Now it's we're on the North Saskatchewan. There's a big campground there now. So we went down and went there, and then we took horses up to Safleur, and we got a goat there. But then we had 1 day left. Well, let's just hike up 2 O'Clock Creek right above there, and it was kind of funny. We saw this bear. He said, I'll take that bear. It was a pretty big, good-sized black bear. So we're just going to go, and I looked down, and there was this huge ram just down below us. I said, "George, your ram's down there." He said, "No, don't joke with me now." No. Anyway, he shot it and it fell over this cliff. And we're down there, and he was pretty animated. He was talking away, and I was working on the animal, and all of a sudden I heard a sneeze, and I knew it wasn't George because he was talking. I looked up, and here's that bear standing right above us. And I said, George! So he shot the bear, and it fell right down top of the sheep.
Oh, gee.
I started to learn how to mountain climb. I started heading up, and he laughed. He said, where are you going? I said, well, you had the gun.
Yeah, but eventually the hunting wasn't your favorite thing.
No, I had one incident with this American from Florida that we were actually pretty close to Jasper Park. We were in Opaven Creek out by, up on, you kind of look down in the Brazos from there. But it was I took him way up for sheep, and we went up this valley, and I saw there was some sheep coming there, and we went up, and a bunch of ewes and young rams jumped up, and he went to shoot. I said, you can't shoot those. And he said, well, they got horns. And I hit his gun just as he shot, and then he turned and pointed it at me.
Oh.
So I could see this weird look in his eyes,
He didn't come back.
No, I said, we were going to camp out there. And I said, no, we're just riding back to our main camp. And it was funny, we were riding along, and I had this feeling I had him ahead of me. I looked back, and there's two huge elk come out in the hill just behind us, two big bulls. And I went to tell him, and no. I thought, I probably shouldn't be doing this business anymore. Yeah. So I didn't do much of that after that.
Yeah. And then in the autumn too, you take the horses back to the yacht.
Yeah, we trailed them back from wherever we were, and sometimes it was like 3 or 4 days. We didn't end up back at the ranch with them. We took a few to Millerville too, kept them hard for the winter so that we'd chase horses with them in the spring.
Right.
Plus we did some wild horse chasing there too.
Yeah. Yeah, you did lots of wild horse chasing.
Yeah, that was fun.
That was fun. Now you took the shoes off the horses at Yahatinda.
Yeah.
Why did you do that?
Well, you can't have them on in the winter. The ice builds up, and they can't paw snow properly, and plus their feet grow out, and so they kind of contract under the heels and build up snow. Just can't do it. They don't do well with shoes on.
No.
Yeah.
No. And then where are we now? We're getting into the winter now.
Oh, okay.
Your winter stories, your winter Skokie stories. So the season at Skokie was a lot shorter in those days.
Yeah, just March and April. The first year, I think, should I tell about that trip? That was
sure. Talk about your first trip in there.
None of us had skied before, except my mom had an old pair of wooden skis that she'd, I think, towed behind a sleigh out west of Turner Valley or something. But Dad had snowshoes. He was an old trapper. And this Charlie Rainier, who was kind of a cowboy guy, and myself, we rented skis from Franz Haas up at Temple. And he showed us how to put the skins on, and we had these old Trapper Nelson packs with the big bags on, and the old wooden frame one. So we headed to Skokie, and I can remember Franz Haas and Slim Fleming, remember the bus driver, Slim, kind of looking at us, wondering if we were going to ever come back again. But we headed out, and Jerry Lister was the warden there then, and he'd broken the trail with skis, so we had a trail to follow. But we got over by Boulder Pass pretty good, but Mom was getting pretty tired. She fell a lot, and Charlie and I were doing okay. We were tromping along. We got up Deception, and Charlie and I kind of went ahead we had the heavier packs. And last we looked down, Dad was on his snowshoes towing Mom up by her ski pole. So we thought, well, we better keep going. So we got to the top, and we just went straight down until we'd pile up and then get up and pile up again. And we finally got to the lodge somehow. I remember the last way down, Charlie he just had moccasin rubbers on and instead of ski boots. I'd rented ski boots anyway. But he just shooshed all the way down to the bottom and somehow stayed up. I made about 4 potholes. We got to the lodge and took all the shutters off and got the fire going, and Mom and Dad still weren't there, so we headed back, and Mom was pretty played out by that time, and she said, I'm not leaving here until I can either ride or ride a horse out. So she'd put eggs in her pajamas in the pack, and it turned out to be a big PJ omelet, actually. But we made it. We actually got a snow machine shortly after that, so that.
Yeah. Yeah.
We had the first snow machine in the country then.
Right, and for a while there, the snow machines came into.
Yeah, and later in the 68, 69, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was kind of like mountain biking in the 80s. The parks didn't know what to do about them. They hadn't seen them before. So they were coming into Skokie, and it wasn't too compatible with the skiers. Somebody sweating tears as they're going up the hill, and the snow machine full of rum going by. Those guys were fast too. They were a little crazy, and they go out at night. I don't know how they didn't kill themselves,
but you actually made some money those years.
Yeah, it was probably the most money we made was when those guys came in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Usually the skiers were, just on weekends a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
But it was fun. We had the whole lodge to ourselves, and then weekends people would come, and
so it was
some
really
of the guests gave us little ski lessons. And
it was quiet midweek then.
it was, yeah.
Yeah.
We had an old light plant there that didn't work very well.
Electric light.
Yeah, it was there when we came. You probably still see where there was light bulbs in Skokie.
Yeah, I think they have pine cones in them.
Yeah,
now.
that's right.
Yeah.
Which was good. We were glad to get rid of that noisy thing.
Yeah. And you met Jim Davies in those early years. He was just fine.
Yeah, the first time I met Jim was we wanted to check the horses, and Dad got Jim to fly into Ptarmigan Lake on his plane. He didn't have his helicopter then. And I brought the Skidoo out and met him at Ptarmigan Lake. And I'd never been in an airplane before, so I was staring at that, and Jim hadn't seen a Skidoo before, so he was out looking at that, And we flew down to the Red Deer and checked the horses and threw salt out of the airplane to the horses. It was pretty neat. And then he landed on Ptarmigan Lake, and I skidooed back into Skokie.
It was a different time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
then how long did your mom and dad run Timberline tours for?
Till 1974. Then Paul Pito took it over, and he's still there, still got it.
Yeah. And who's Paul Pito?
Paul Pito is actually the grandson of Walter Pito and the grandnephew of Bill Pito. So he had quite a history. It's outfitting is his blood. And him and his wife Sue still run the place, the horse part of it, and pack into Skokie. It was kind of funny, about 10 years after we'd sold to Paul, I was lucky enough to be a district warden in Cyclone in the Red Deer Lakes, and I was riding out with warden uniform and a pack horse, and I met Paul coming in with a load of pack horses to Skokie, and we didn't even have to say anything. We just sat there and laughed, because 10 years before it would have been the other way around.
Yeah,
he was a park warden before that.
Yeah. Oh, gee.
Funny.
Skokie and Temple to the ski area then? Was that him?
Yes. Yeah, it was. And Mom and Dad ran and my Aunt Rita and Uncle Norm and their children were in Skokie, and then they helped out at Temple in the winter. And they were both cooking. Rita Norm cooked in Skokie, or Rita cooked. Norm helped, and is a backer and good horse tracker.
Yeah.
And we went out on several pack trips with them.
Yeah.
I got to tell you about one pack trip with Ray.
Okay, you tell it.
Ray, as good as the word, he said he'd come out on pack trips, and he brought a lot of his old customers with us. And this one trip, I guess some of you know Peter Poole here. His father, John Poole, and his wife and some other couple went with us on this pack trip. And we had went over Pulsatilla Pass, and then down over Badger Pass, down into the Flints Park area. And we were camped there by Block Lakes, and Ray wanted to stop with the guests at Sawback Lake and told us to go over the pass to Mystic Lake. He said, "You boys just go over the path, and when you get down, you'll see a river coming in. You go follow that up, and you'll get to the lake." Well, I had Richard Rainier with me, as one of Charlie's brother, and their dad, Pop Rainier, and we had the pack horses. We went by and we saw them fishing at Sawback Lake, and we kept going, and I hollered up to Dick, he was ahead, and I said, you know, didn't Ray say we had to go upstream somewhere? We're still going downstream. He said, oh, it's got to be down here. And anyway, a little later, Ray comes running up with his horse. He said, what are you boys doing? Are you going to Banff for a beer or what? We'd gone quite a few miles past the turnoff, so we turned around and went up. And it was getting late by this time, and we were setting up camp, and we had this rotten old pack horse by the name of Belle. And John Poole went and grabbed the satchel off of Belle, and she just took off bucking, and Ray yelled, Jesus Christ, you pilgrims, stay away from the horses. So the pack horse bucked the pack and took out 2 other pack horses down, and I was walking back, sleeping, and ran right over the cook stove and hit Dick's ankle and broke a bunch of dishes. And anyway, we finally got the tents up and we got all settled, and we were sitting around the campfire, and John kind of joking with Ray, we were all having a little drink of whiskey, and he says, Ray, I don't know about this thing, you calling me a pilgrim. I was kind of insulted about that. He says, oh, John, you mustn't let that bother you. You are on kind of a pilgrimage, you know.
Oh, gee. Quite a guy, the Ray.
Yeah, he had quite a sense of humor.
Quite a sense of humor, yeah. Yeah. So you, after Timberline Tours was sold, your mom and dad, where did they went up to Namtaija?
Yeah, Jimmy Simpson offered them to run the store up at Namtaija Lodge, and so they did that for several years. My dad passed away up there, and Mom still ran it for about 10 years after that.
And you went into the warden service?
Yeah, I went in the early 70s. I was working up at Rogers Pass before that for several winters. First year I went up there was Noel Gardner was running it, and he was the son of Clem Gardner, who was a famous rancher, cowboy out, and Dad and him were friends, and they ran into each other in Banff. I think they went and had a beer or something and got talking about Skokie. Years before, Noel had actually packed into Skokie, packed supplies. He actually had this one story. I'm kind of rambling here a bit.
Yeah, that's fine.
He had this one story of packing in. He was packed in a case of eggs. Lizzie Rummo was running it then. And there was this woman there that Lizzie was worried about, and she was hurt herself coming in, and I think she was fairly good size too, but she asked Noel if he'd help her out, you know, so I think Noel ended up packing her most of the way out to Temple. And she got out there and she said, well, what do I owe you, Noel? And he said, how much do you weigh? I get paid by the pound.
Oh, gee. So you worked for Noel?
Yeah, Dad and Noel were sitting down, and Noel, they talked about Skokie, I guess, and Noel said, well, why don't you send your boy up here to work for me at Rogers Pass? This was a year after the highway opened, and I was, so I got this letter saying, yeah, come on up and work, and I had to, they supplied the skis and skins, and I had to buy ski boots, so I went to the Hudson Bay and bought a pair of ski boots for $10. And I got up to Rogers Pass, caught a bus up there, and Noel met me, and showed me how to run the snow machine, and we went up to Fidelity, which was where all the research was done. It's still up there. It's kind of on the west end of the park, and he lived up there with his wife Gladys and his 2 dogs, and there was one other observer up there. So my job was mainly shoveling snow and fixing the light plant and doing some readings, but the first day I was up there, he decided to take me up to, it's called the Round Hill, it's up above the station up there. And she showed me how to put skins on the skis, and somehow made it up there. And it was up there, up this hill, and he had a wind gauge with the little cups on it. And he said, well, climb up there and clean those cups out. And it was like 20 feet up, and these little steel rungs, and I was kind of, I looked straight down, and there's a lake called Shoosh Lake down below, and it's like 1,000 feet below that. I was hanging on this pole in the wind, and I finally got to the top, and I was hanging on and scratching these little winter vanes. And
Yeah.
I made it down, and then he said, well, we'll ski down. And he, I took the skins off, because he did, and he took off, and it was all foggy, and I just kind of followed his tracks, and then I'd wipe out, and he wait for me down the corner, and I kind of go straight off, bam. Gladys was watching out of the window as I came through, and I think I went right over a little spruce tree and landed on a big heap. And she said, you know, I'm going to have to teach you how to ski, or you're going to end up going home in a basket, and your mom and dad wouldn't be too happy about that. So, so actually Gladys was the one that gave me ski lessons up there.
Right. And who was Noel Gardner? Noel is one of the most interesting characters.
Yeah, he'd left the ranch, you know, and him and Dad were about the same age, and I think him and Clem were too much alike, so he headed for the mountains, and he became a park warden after, you know, just packing and guiding, and he was actually one of the first warden to give ski lessons to the wardens. He was their first ski instructor, basically.
Yeah.
Then he went up to Rogers Pass and started the avalanche program. I think he went down to Snow Valley in Utah and picked up stuff there. And he brought the Army in to shoot the avalanches down. He was the first one, and they did that for several years after that.
Yeah. Yeah, and then you worked for some of the people who followed Noel Gardner, like the Schleiss brothers and Peter Shearer.
I went back in '68 and '69 and worked for Fred and Walter Schleiss.
Yeah.
And Bob Haney was there, and Randy Chisholm, who were all wardens after.
Yeah.
Mike Pittaway, whose father was Bert Pittaway, he was a chief warden here at one time. It was a good bunch to work with. We had a lot of fun. And Freddie was a little bit, you know, he had his way of doing things, and he would get quite excited sometimes. It was funny, we had this one fella named Don, another Don. He was kind of a tall, lanky guy, and his claim to fame was he jumped off the jump at Revelstoke, I guess. So he did that in his interview, and they hired him, but didn't realize that he'd actually was a bar bet, and he'd went off the thing and survived it somehow. But he didn't really know how to ski that well. There was one night, we always did these shoots at night, and the Army were, we had these gun points where the Army would put the gun and have shovel marks and had all the readings. So the observer had to stay with the Army, and then Fred or Walter would go out kind of below the avalanche path, not right below it, but and they'd give the readings, and the gun crew would set it up, and we'd be on the radio to Freddie to when to shoot the avalanche. So this one time Don was there. He had kind of a slow drawl, you know, and Freddie gets, now you shoot that avalanche now, you know, and the Army guy comes up, and Freddie was wondering why we weren't firing the trigger, and the Army guy said, there's a train coming. He was a big sergeant kind of, and Don gets on the radio and said, Freddie, there's a train coming, we can't shoot. A train, what kind of a train? And Don says, what kind of a train, to the sergeant? He says, a choo-choo train. He gets on the radio and says, it's a choo-choo train, Fred. Fred, just about lost it.
Oh, gee. Oh, gee. Yeah, and you worked with Peter Shearer, too?
Yeah, I went back. My wife Grace and I got married in 1971. The year before that, I'd worked for Peter. No, the 2 years before that, for Peter Shearer. No, for Walter, and then came back and worked for Peter Shearer, and he was more into research and science. Really good guy to work for, a really nice fella. I worked for him for 2 winters. The second winter was, we'd been married, and so we lived in the apartments up there. That was that big snow year, 71, 72. And you couldn't go anywhere. They had the whole pass closed down. You couldn't even walk out to past the service station, hardly. Even some of the operators had nervous breakdowns because they'd be plowing the road and the slide would come down over the shed, and places where they'd never been before. It was a huge snow year. The Cougar Creek slide, I don't know whether you know the area, there's a 90-degree turn in the Cougar Creek slide. It came down right over the highway, huge timber in it. Paul Lanhorn and I worked together for Peter, and we'd been there the day before doing snow readings there, had a water gauge there. This thing was like 50 feet high, this slide, and went right over the railway, and it was all closed down. And Gordy Peter and I were up there at night. That's Paul's brother, Gordy. And we were up on top just with a cat driver. They were trying to start clearing it, and we could hear the trees cracking, and another slide was coming down there. And we didn't know what to do. We just ran and sat in the cat and got covered with snow. The slide didn't come over, but the dust did. That was a scary winter. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, I hear a few roads around here were closed at times too.
Yes.
That's a famous winter.
Yeah.
But that's another story. Maybe when we get Peter Furman up here, he can tell us about it.
I
think he was responsible for
He brought
them.
the one down at Bosworth, yeah.
At Bosworth that went across the...
Andy Addison was the chief warden then, and he said, Andy, you know, he always kind of laughed, and he said, yeah, that bomb was really loud. You could hear it all the way to Ottawa.
Oh, gee. And then you also worked for Walter Perrin, too. Another famous
Yeah, that
name.
was back in the 66. Walter was in charge of public safety then in the ski patrol. The wardens had the ski patrol then. And Joe Hustenson was the new warden there. Before him was Jerry Lister, then Andy Anderson, then Joe. He said, well, you should put in for that. And I said, well, I don't think I can ski good enough. He said, well, do it anyway, you know. And so I went and visited Walter. Walter's really soft-spoken, really nice guy. And he said, yeah, I think we should hire you because you know the backcountry. And we had a new warden in case of avalanches. We can teach you how to ski on the job. He was a real gentleman to work for. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, he was. Wow. You knew lots of the old timers. You must have known Dorothy's husband, Ed.
Oh, yes. Knew Ed well.
Yeah, yeah. And you knew Willie here, Willie
Bill
Broom.
Broom, yeah.
Bill Broom.
And actually, I first got on the warden service was in Yoho. We had kind of I guess I'd call it the Yoho years. I was working at Rogers Pass, and then Andy Anderson was the chief there and looking for someone to do horse work. And we just had a new little baby girl sitting over there. And I got on with a two-man trail crew. We were doing horse work with clearing trails. And we lived in field, and we still had the horse stables at Emerald Lake at the same time. And worked, I was able to work there all summer, and then they kept me on as avalanche observer in the winter. So the next few years I would end up being ranch boss there, and then I got on the warden service there and worked with a lot of really old wardens, and both of our daughters were born there, and both loved to ski and hike, and we used to go over into Lake O'Hara and stay at the warden cabin where Marcia and her family were. And hiked into Little Yoho, and we were able to stay in all the warden cabins in their days off. You know, it was a great lifestyle, and the girls have kept it up ever since. They're still out hiking and skiing and guiding and
Good.
staying in the mountains.
Good.
Yeah,
Good.
and I was able to work with some old-time wardens there, Stan Stahara and Gord Rutherford. We had really good times there. Yeah. We had a chief warden there who was by the name of Hal Shepard, who was quite a character. He was a World War II vet and came as chief warden. He looked like John Wayne. He had one eye, kind of from True Grit, you know. But he was tough, but he was fair. He would kind of intimidating, you know. He was always a really rough guy, but he was good to us, you know. One time he was had a motorcycle gang come in and stay there, and we were all kind of worried about that, and I'll take care of them. And he went in and he moved them to another place, and pretty soon he was sitting down with them talking about their motorcycles. And somebody else, they probably would have beat him up.
Yeah.
He was,
Yeah. Well, speaking of criminals and motorcycle gangs and stuff, you were part of the mafia, weren't you?
Yeah.
The Millerville
Mafia, yeah.
Who are the Millerville Mafia?
Well, there was Bob Haney, Keith Foster, Johnny Nylon, Perry Jacobson. We all ended up in the warden service in Banff at one time or another. And a lot of them worked for Dad. And so Andy Anderson used to joke that wardens had to work for Bert Mickle for 2 years before they could get on the warden service. And one of the wardens, Keith Everett, sort of surrounded by people from Millerville. He called us the Millerville Mafia. And somebody said, I think maybe Lester Pearson nailed up a Warden Wanted poster at Millerville at some point or something. So yeah, we all worked together, and we went to school together, and it was pretty funny.
And yeah, some of you are still around. Bob, we'll
Yeah.
get Bob Haney up here somewhere.
Yeah,
Is he in
don't
the
see
audience?
Bob, yeah.
Is Bob here?
Don't think
No,
so.
don't see
No.
him. We'll get him up here. And now the last 13 years of your warden service was in the cultural resources area.
Yeah, that was kind of a new thing, and it was I really enjoyed it. I went out with the archaeologists, and we were finding sites that hadn't been previously found before. And one was on the Red Deer River, I think is one of the main ones. I was down at Scotch Camp, which is on the east end there, and I was with the archaeologists, and they were telling me about these pit houses, which were subterranean houses where they built wood domes over top. And they showed me these ones at Scotch Camp, and said, geez, there's some those up further up the valley, about 18 miles under the glacier. I thought they were old garbage dumps from outfitters. So the next day we rode up and started excavating them, and found they did carbon dating. They were over 3,000 years old, these sites, and way up the valley. Would have been right under a glacier at the time. So it just, I think because I'd been up the Red Deer River so many times chasing horses or guiding or fishing trips, or you're always thinking, oh, maybe I'll see a bear or an elk. You knew where the sheep were in McConnell Creek, and the elk were in Terrell Creek, and the bears were everywhere. And then all of a sudden I was looking at, people have been there for 3,000 years before. That just made me a whole new, I guess, appreciation of where we lived. It was quite moving, actually.
Yeah. We're not the first in this
Yeah.
valley. No, it
Yeah.
goes back a long ways.
We found bison skulls, bison cores like that, where it's the big bisons at that time, and all sorts of tools and flakes. And it's pretty exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one person we haven't talked about is your sister Faye.
My sister was a character. Gord knew her well. She was as dark as I was fair, and very attractive. You probably remember.
We all loved her.
Yeah.
Everybody was in love with Faye Mickle.
And
Yeah.
she used that a bit, I have to say. But she was, and she wasn't beyond playing good tricks on us, It's funny, I was kind of raised in a matriarchal family, I never thought of, women's rights and all that, because that seemed like they were the boss anyway. But my mom definitely was. And my sister and I did all the same things. We chased horses, and we milked the cows, and we did everything together. But this one time we just come out of a hunting trip. It was we'd been out for 3 weeks, and Faye was cooking, and Keith Foster and Dad and I were on it. And Keith was a little different that way, we were coming out, and we had to trail the horses all the way back to the Ahawtindi, which was about 4 days. And we were close to Nordegg, so it was a long ways. The David Thompson Highway wasn't there yet. It was cut out, though. There was a trail on it. And anyway, Faye wanted to do the trip, and Dad wanted Faye to do something else, so Keith and I were going to do the trip. And Keith said, yeah, you go back and, do a little housekeeping and some woman's work, and I could see Faye's eyes flashing, and I sort of should have clued in, but he said, yeah, you get the food ready for us. And so she packed 2 boxes of food, packed boxes full of food, and we headed down the trail, and she made us a lunch in plastic bags, put it in our saddle bags, and down the trail, and I heard this holler from above, and so-and-so sister of yours. I was on the lead, and Keith was about 20 horses behind chasing them, and he opened up the lunch, and it was 2 pieces of bread with a whole can of beans mashed in it. Keith hated beans. I was kind of tired of them too.
Yeah.
So I looked at mine, and it was just 2 pieces of bread. And I called it a jam sandwich, 2 pieces of bread jammed together.
And what was in your food box?
Well, we got, it was about probably 30 miles the first day, and we set up camp, and so we were pretty hungry. We opened up the box. There was a half a loaf of bread and some sandwich bread and a little cover over it, and we looked in, it was nothing but beans in both boxes. We still had 3 days of riding, we had to eat beans.
Oh, gee. No, unfortunately.
Keith had some language that wasn't very suitable. I wasn't too happy about it either by that time.
Yeah.
Faye was grinning all the time.
Yeah, she was. No, and unfortunately she died.
She passed away at a young age. It was pretty sad. And she was only 36.
Yeah.
Her daughter looks just like her. Mm-hmm. She still lives out. They moved out by Caroline. And her daughter lives out there, and she's got 2 lovely girls, and her son Marty has got 3 nice boys. So her legend's living on for sure.
Good,
Yeah.
good. Well, maybe, do you feel up to reading the poem that
Sure.
we talked about? Faye was very much a poet and wrote some beautiful poems. And we thought we'd end this session with Dawn, if he doesn't cry, reading one of Faye's poems. Does that work for you?
Sure. This one's called The Wilderness Road. She wrote it when she was about 18, I think. The Wilderness Road. As I sit beside the stream that's slowly flowing by, I watch the campfire glowing dim, and then I wonder why. What makes the golden moon so bright, as a million stars cast twinkling light? What gives a sudden chill of fright as I sit alone at night? The distant shadows of my horse, silhouetted on the hill. The gentle nicker now and then breaks the shiver and the chill. And then I ask, is she alone as I hear the soft wind moan? Does she stand there, still as stone, listening to the hoot owl's tone? I see my bed roll on the ground, and I see the tall spruce overhead. I hear the wolf howl on the hill, as I venture to my bed. As I lie in gentle rest, a field mouse comes to be my guest and finds some loose threads for his nest. But I don't mind this venturing pest. And when I wake at the break of day to see the sky turn scarlet bright, and the sun peeks o'er the hill to bring to me the rich daylight, I find my horse and then I ride through the hills where I can hide, and feel the blessing of my pride as I watch the eagles glide. And I know the answer's here, amongst the wilderness so free, a million different sights and sounds. I know this world was made for me.
Well, thank you very much, Dawn.
You bet.
That's wonderful.
I got more Ray stories.
We've got more Ray stories.
No.
Yeah, thank you, Dawn.
You
That
bet.
was fabulous. You're probably all getting a little chilled now. There's tea and cookies and coffee over in Abergwait, the Crosby home, and Dawn will be there, and maybe he'll tell you another Ray story. Great.
Thanks, Chic.
Thank you, Dawn.
You bet. It was fun.